buddies, Neil Ciceriga here. I am Lemon Demon, the musician who made Spirit Phone, this album. This is a commentary track for an album, which is weird. It's hard to talk and listen at the same time, so after a few failed attempts, I ended up writing a lot of notes. So sometimes, if I sound like I know what I'm saying, it's because I'm reading from a script. And other times, I'll sound like, what's the word? Bad. So, Spirit Phone began as soon as my last album, View Monster, came out, which was 2008. And it came out 2016. I still put out music in the intervening years, but they were just short EPs and sample-based mashup albums. This was a long-in-the-works return to a full-length original music album. And there were multiple times when I thought I had this thing in the bag, and I was always telling people, like, yeah, it's going to come out this year, it's going to come out next year, it's almost done. And, all these tracks were almost, quote-unquote, 90% done, no matter how much I messed with them. But eventually, I figured it out. So to rewind a bit, this album starts off with some white noise, some soft white noise, some spooky sounds, and then the music begins. The white noise returns throughout the album a few times. What does it mean? It's a ghost. That's what it means. This track is called Lifetime Achievement Award. I picked that title late in production. I didn't feel like any of the lines from the actual chorus of the song worked as a title. Some early versions, I think, were named Experiments in the Revival, which is a reference to Experiments in the Revival of Organisms, a 1940s Soviet medical film where they supposedly kept a severed dog's head alive with science. I've never actually watched this clip because it just sounds really disturbing, although it's possibly fake, but I'm glad I didn't go with that title because it's maybe too freaky a reference right out of the gate. Nonetheless, I've got this whole song about creepy scientists reviving dead musicians, reviving them straight into new contracts like performing animals. This song idea goes back to 2012, when there was that whole, scandal about the hologram version of Tupac. Remember that? I barely remember that, but anyway, the early 2010s is where this song was born, and the references to Michael Jackson's death and to Katy Perry sort of date it, but not too badly, because Katy Perry is still doing her thing, and Michael Jackson's still dead. The chorus uses, in addition to me screaming computer voice, it's actually not a real one, but it's an emulated Atari speech synthesis program. And those things are so bad at pronouncing things, I had to break up the words into individual syllables just so it wouldn't be cemetery instead of cemetery. An earlier version of this song was a totally different recording that I just worked on it too long and it just started to sound bad to me, so I scrapped almost everything and I recreated it from scratch. And I listened to it recently, and this always happens, but I was like, this is kind of better in some ways. And that's just really aggravating. But that version was missing a few important chunks, I think, and starting over made it easier to kind of insert a few extra bars here and there to spread out the lyrics a little bit. And this pretty cool keyboard solo wasn't in that version, so it was worth it, I think. But of course, all my friends who I would send early versions of this song to, when they heard the new version, they did not like it as much. That always seems to happen. In fact, it happened publicly, because I put out an early version of Reaganomics later on this album, and people got used to listening to that version, and then I changed a bunch of stuff, and a lot of people did not like it as much. Now, one solution to this is for me not to take 8 years to make an album, and don't feel guilty about not putting out enough content and end up releasing songs early in an unfinished state so people can just know that I'm not dead and I'm actually working on music. But now I'm not even talking about this song, so let me stop myself right there. Actually, the only note that I missed is earlier when I said you're unnatural, babe, which is a pun on you're a natural, you're unnatural. Originally, that was just you're unstoppable, babe. So I got a bad pun in there. That's one thing I improved over the original. Cool. Most of my songs, there's just one tempo that's locked in, but for this I tried to add little moments where it slows down or give a drum fill a little room to breathe, and that helps it make it feel like a more alive song. So this part it's my voice going through a really deep synthesizer vocoder effect, and I am paraphrasing the disclaimer that shows up at the beginning of the video for Thriller, where Michael Jackson, I guess, had a crisis of conscience and just had to make sure that everyone knows that he's not a practitioner of magic or whatever. So I just took that phrase because it's pretty well worded, and I kind of turned it into a Pledge of Allegiance type call and response thing with some robots. And for some reason, with the robot voice, the word record just sounded not robotic. I had to say record. Making this little a cappella intro involved like 4 or 5 different vocal tracks, and some of them are doing, like the main chords, ba 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 ba. But then there's one track that's doing all the in-between notes, and that one sounds really funny on its own. It's just me going ba 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 ba. I've got a fake string quartet going in this song that, to my ear, sounds pretty good. I've always found that strings are one of the hardest instruments to make sound realistic using just a computer, but I found a pretty good sound library that is sadly discontinued now. So this song is about a dedicated caller into a radio show who has it all figured out, and he just needs to explain it to someone. And even just knowing how he's going to sound to other people is giving him all this anxiety, and it's coming out before he can even say what he wants to say. In fact, it never comes out. So this song is just a big rant of preemptive defensiveness and saying you're going to do something without ever doing it. And I name-dropped Robert Stack and Leonard Nimoy, who hosted, respectively, Unsolved Mysteries and In Search Of, which were both shows that dealt with bizarre and often paranormal stories and tales. And I actually love to read about UFOs and paranormal stuff, even though I'm not a real believer. When I was a kid, it was just a really fun thing to stretch my imagination with, I guess. On my Patreon, I posted an early ancestor of this song called Ivanushka, which was based on the movie Jack Frost, which was a Mystery Science Theater episode. And that song had a lot of different sounding parts, but one of them was basically the chorus of this song, only I was singing about Father Mushroom and Ivanushka. And that happens all the time in my process. I will find melodies in songs, unfinished songs from years and years ago, and since they're mine and I've never done anything with them, I'm free to basically plagiarize myself. And a lot of the time, these melodies will just kind of stay in my head for years, and that's how they'll end up getting reused. And I'll be going through old files, and then I'll realize, oh, I actually did record this melody a long time ago, and I totally forgot. But the flip side of that is discovering something like that can be a little depressing, because it reminds me, oh man, it takes so long to finish music. Writing this little rap here was great because I got to use a lot of little just like phrases and stems that I had written in a big text file that I always wanted to use, like the word ufology or name dropping ancient aliens. I actually just paused and checked my old lyrics.txt file, and yeah, I totally wrote species of big cat, I am Robert Stack, ufology, demonology, all like in this little paragraph. So I guess that's where this song came from. And the Super Sargasso Sea that I mentioned was a sort of thought experiment by Charles Fort, who was a very interesting early catalogist of the paranormal or seemingly impossible stories. Look him up. The song always makes me think of once when I was a kid, me and my dad were just messing around with a touch-tone telephone and trying to play music on it. And I think we were trying to play Shave and a Haircut, and we must have played the first 3 notes and then hung up. And those first 3 notes happened to be 911 because a cop showed up at our door a little while later saying like, hey, we got a call, and someone just hung up. So I imagine my dad probably tried to explain what happened, and the cop must have been just like, okay, please don't do that. As this album was starting to come together, and I was starting to get excited and see it as not just a collection of songs, but it's an experience, man, I started extending the outros for songs and making these kind of swirling synthesizer soundscapes. And I had to shorten this one because it was just too much. But I've always really liked the effect of a song kind of decompressing and getting you ready for the next track, and not knowing exactly where the cutoff point is. So this is Cabinet Man, an upbeat song about a supernatural serial killer. This is supposed to be the kind of ludicrous story that would show up in an old horror anthology like Creepshow, with lots of creative gore and vivid lights. I don't really remember what inspired me to write this kind of story. There is the urban legend of Polybius, a weird 80s arcade game that made people sick and lose their minds and die, but the body horror element where a guy somehow medically transplants, all his systems into a video game cabinet. Not sure what I was doing when I came up with that one. There is real guitar in this, but the underlying rhythm guitar is fake because I tried playing it myself and I got really bad hand cramps trying to keep up that rhythm. There's also backup vocals that are filtered through a plugin called BitSpeak, which makes vocals sound like a speak and spell. I also used it on Melt Everyone from Mouth Sounds on Rob Thomas's voice from the song Smooth. I've also got a lot of really fast hi-hat hits here, which I definitely did not play IRL. A lot of these songs use little synth instruments that have a random element to them. They'll play, a note an octave up or an octave down in a total random fashion. And that is built into the plugin. It's not how I'm playing it, which is good. It adds some variety to the sound, but the drawback is every single time I play the song, it sounds a little bit different. And that's true anytime I export the song as well. So if I ever needed to go back and, remix or reconstruct the song from the original files, it would end up having a lot of little variations from the original. One of the bonus tracks on Spirit Phone is like a more chill version of this song from 2009. Doesn't have any lyrics. Long before I thought of putting body parts in a video game cabinet, I remember some early lyrics being about a seesaw. I guess my content has changed a bit over the years. I reversed the drums in this part, which is something I forgot you could do. I'm glad I did it. And of course, you can't be a monster arcade cabinet without immediately having to reckon with becoming obsolete in the face of home consoles and portable consoles. This guy is pretty much doomed to just be thrown away or end up living in some enthusiast's collection. Maybe be in a movie theater lobby. When I played this song live years ago, I made a backup video, or like a backing projected video that was clips from a 80s anthology movie about an evil arcade game called The Bishop of Battle, I think. It's from a movie called Nightmares with Emilio Estevez. It had a lot of cool visuals. Lots of 80s 3D wireframe stuff coming out of the screen and shooting lasers. This is another song where none of the actual words in the lyrics grabbed me as title material. So I guess I just came up with Cabinet Man because it sounds kind of spooky. And also there's two other tracks with the word man in the title, and I guess that's just a subtle way of unifying. Not really. What am I talking about? Well, this part sounds pretty cool, right? This was pretty high on my vocal register. I just kind of had to yell it and overlay multiple tracks to make it sound okay. It sounds okay. After I came up with the order for the songs on the album, I ended up having to go in and alter the intros and outros of the songs to make them fit together in a cool way. So, like, this song was done and it came in with the little soft strum guitar, and I ended up isolating a synth from later in the song and putting it right at the beginning with some nice echoes to make it a more smooth transition into this song. And also to make sure that there's, occasionally there's more than 5 seconds where I'm not singing in the album. So this song, I had this melody, which was always meant to sound very doo-wop inspired and kind of sad. But when I realized that I don't have the vocal chops of old doo-wop singers, I somehow got the idea to just cheat with vocoder effects. So I have my actual voice on the lead vocals, plus like 4 or 5 backup vocals put through vocoders. And, like these are plug-in vocoders, not actual physical devices that I own. So there's those tracks, plus all these synthesizer tracks that are pushing the melodies through onto those vocals. And if I took those synths out, there could be a version of this song with all natural voices, but it would sound awful because I wasn't very concerned with hitting the right notes. The synths were doing that work. The lyrics are another hypothetical sci-fi short story, just an interdimensional love story with really bad repercussions. The sort of thing that people were worried the Large Hadron Collider would unleash on the world. This all blossomed from the title, which is just a dumb pun on Brown-Eyed Girl. Just like the weirdness of eye color in love songs. Because eyes are these amazing windows to the soul that we fall in love with and we put them on a pedestal, but they're really just another body part at the end of the day. I don't know. I like eyes and all, but they're just the window to the eyes. Earlier on, I had more realistic sounding drums on this version of the song, but for some reason they just weren't sounding right, and I don't know why I decided to add kind of these early 90s sampled like New Jack Swing big drums, but I think it worked. Recording really quiet parts with vocals is tough because I have never had any kind of isolated sound booths. I've never even tried, really. Sometimes I'll throw a blanket over my computer. So recording something like that was kind of tough. I'd have to get pretty close to the mic and cut off any room noise at the end of a word, stuff like that. And this breakdown section was kind of an interesting thing to produce because I guess I just started with just the synths playing kind of like, solid tones with no real volume variation. And then I sat down with a microphone and basically just recorded myself humming into the microphone to add some intonation to those synths. So for like the bass, I wouldn't be worrying about the note. I'd just be going, boom, wow. And then, once I put it all together, I had the right notes and the right volumes, and it all sounded pretty cool. I guess this one has a happy ending, sorta. Like as a romance. My favorite vocal track happens during this part, and it's when it's like half faded out, but it's this part, the whoa, whoa, whoa harmony. That's me acknowledging that adding a ton of reverb smooths things out. And to transition into When He Died, which is more of an explicitly horror-themed song, I recorded these janky synths to an actual cassette tape, and I played them back through this vintage Radio Shack battery-operated cassette player. And if you pick it up and you shake it, it sounds very warbly and very spooky. I highly recommend listening to all music in this way. So this is another kind of doo-wop with a weird twist type of song. It uses that classic 4-chord 50s progression, I believe it's called. But it switches between Lydian and diatonic scales for the first two and the last two chords of that progression. And what that means is there's literally like one note that is off from what you'd expect from this kind of song. You can't hear it in my vocals, but it's in like some of the backup instruments and the guitar solo that comes later. Everyone always compares this glockenspiel part to the theme from Rugrats, and I disagree. It's clearly supposed to evoke Take Me There by Blackstreet. Totally different song. You can hear some flourishes from this janky little toy wooden harp that's like tuned beyond saving. You can hear it in its full glory whenever Snape appears in the Potter Puppet Pals Halloween special that I made some years back. I definitely have a habit of finding and collecting weird little instruments like that and forgetting to use them, or just not finding a place to use them. So I'm glad, when I can use a messed up harp in a song. Key change chorus, that's a cheap but effective trick in songwriting. I really like the pitched up la la la's in the right channel. They sound like cartoon cats. Does anyone remember, like, statues that cried blood? That was a thing. I think I probably saw it on an episode of Sightings. Maybe on the Sci-Fi Channel. When I was working on this song, They Might Be Giants came out with a song called When Will You Die? And I was briefly worried that they would be too similar, but thankfully, they're very different. But I do highly recommend that song, for the record. It's a good one. Yeah, that harp is now replaced by a harmonica, because that's another instrument I just had laying around and I didn't really know how to play it correctly, so I just wanted to get it in there, justify owning a harmonica. So the Oka Laughing record was a 1920s novelty record that was just some people laughing together. The idea was that laughter is infectious, so this record should sell like hotcakes, and it did. It was a huge hit. But when I listened to it, I thought it was the scariest thing I've ever heard. And it's public domain, so I got to scratch my sampling itch on this album. By the way, if you have the vinyl version of this album, I definitely recommend, after the third side is done playing, just let it keep playing, and there should be a little surprise there in the center of the disc. And by the way, people seem to have trouble interpreting this song, but it's just a litany of creepy, mysterious things being discovered about someone who's died. You hear about stuff like this every now and then, but I like that this one guy really outdid everyone, and he made sure to leave a real mystery behind. So that's the concept of the song. It's just a guy whose death raised far, far, far more questions than it could ever answer. I really hit that note there. I'm pretty happy with my vocals on this track. I feel like the melody of this song was like pretty up and down, probably one of the harder ones to do. That being said, there's a lot of little notes that I would love to go in and do better, or they just sound off now. But I guess that means I'm improving, that I can hear those imperfections. I know when I was younger, I couldn't. I didn't think I was good, but I just couldn't tell when I was specifically really bad. And if you listen closely, there's like a little heartbeat kick drum here. So this is Sweet Bod. It's weird subject matter, even for me. I had to run this song by my loved ones, and I got a lot of, I don't know, man, responses. But it's inspired by the Mellified Man, a legend that spans multiple cultures, but it probably never happened. Wherein an old guy would willingly eat nothing but honey until he died, so that he could be buried in a coffin full of yet more honey, and after 100 years, he would just kind of turn into a confection with incredible healing properties. It's sort of like being an organ donor. It's a nice thought, anyway. But my idea was, how do you pitch that to someone? Like, hey, so I have this theory. Do you like honey? Somehow this lyrical concept that I had got paired with a jam that I was working on, and something about setting it to music just made it take on an unintentionally perverse tone. So instead of scrapping the song, I thought, well, what if the singer just tries to clarify that it's not a sex thing? But, like, good God, that only makes it worse. I guess that's probably why it's only a legend and it never actually really happened, was it just skeeved people out too much. But in the end, I liked having a funk song that required too much explanation and defensiveness. Because I think singing about someone else's body is weird and commodifying, as it is. So it was a natural fit, I thought. One of the bonus tracks is a demo for this song, and it's just an earlier version with the same lyrics but a harder synth sound. It was just too fast and hard to listen to. I like the big synth breakdown in the middle of it, but that just didn't translate to the new funk direction, so it's pretty different. And to go back even further, before it had any music, the lyrics were originally, they tied into the Boston molasses flood of 1919, which actually killed a bunch of people. And the premise would have been about how on the 100-year anniversary of that, these jars of sweet liquid cure-all would start turning up, being sold on the streets of Boston. But, you know, real people died in that tragedy, and I felt like the one weird legend was enough for a song. And the guitar solo here is the only guest spot on the album, and it's Dave Kitzberg, a really gifted player he's done live shows with me, and I've got that same BitSpeak plugin running on the guitar, and a few of the other synths in this song. My overall direction was to try and make it sound like there was a real vintage funk song, kind of buried under a bunch of more modern and unique sounds. And some of the backup vocals are pitched up a bit to sound like I have both male and female singers. But nope, it's just me. And yes, I finally got to use the word panacea in a song. And those high-pitched cowbells, which I've always loved. I love that kind of shit, like those little tiny tom drums. That stuff's good. And there's some like chopping up of the song here that I added pretty much at the last minute, like in the mixing, mastering stage. Sweet bod. So this is Eighth Wonder. This is the oldest track on the album. It was originally released in 2009, but it's held up pretty well, and it fits the Spirit Phone theme, and it never got an official release. So, into the album it went. And I didn't really change much about it. I added like a little bit of flanger to this intro, and, you know, tweaked the EQ and mixing, all that stuff, but pretty much the same track I released back in 2009. There was actually this extended, like, fiddle solo outro that I chopped off, at least for the music video, which is how most people heard it, so that part's kind of discontinued, I guess. But most of the lyrics come from quotes from this old ghost story, or poltergeist maybe, or just a talking animal. It was reported by a young girl and her family on the Isle of Man in, I think, the 1930s. So look up Jeff the Mongoose, G-E-F. This story stuck out to me because he's so childish and quotable and talkative for a ghost. He's cracking jokes and he's insulting people and making outlandish claims, but he's totally hidden and nobody can really see him. They catch glimpses of a mongoose sometimes, but they don't really see this talking character. And if you read some of the original reporting on him, he has such a memorable presence without ever coming out into the open. He's just a voice in the wall. I fell in love with this story because, well, like a lot of paranormal stories and ghost stories, the people involved swear up and down pretty convincingly that it really happened. But what makes it different is it's the kind of story that a little kid would tell, not understanding that it's not a believable lie. But it's told in a believable way. So it has the effect of not just challenging what you think the rules of the universe are, but challenging that there are any rules. So letting yourself get drawn into the story is, in a way, creepier than a story that is more quote-unquote plausible. Got some real bass in this song, which I don't often do. I remember recording this in the basement of my family's house. It was probably one of the last songs I made there before I moved to the city. And I shot the music video in my family's yard, in the woods that I grew up near, and this old shack that's on our property line. So this song has a real end of an era feeling for me. I think I made this song around the same time as Redesign Your Logo, and they're both the start of a lot of samples and sounds that I continued to use up until today, really. The drum sounds, the strings, the imitation analog synths, as well as trying a little bit harder on my vocals. So it's like I tapped into something pretty good with this song. It just ended up sounding a lot better than anything else I was doing at the time. And I'm realizing now that if I hadn't made this song, or if it had just turned out totally differently, there are a lot of things I wouldn't have even tried in music for the next few years, because it was just a confidence booster to have accidentally made a song that sounds like a real song. So that's Eighth Wonder. This ending was a new composition for the album. It took a lot of effort not to make it its own track. I went overboard with splitting my last album, View Monster, into like 32 different tracks, including all the transitions, so I really had to keep myself in check this time. No superfluous concept tracks or anything. And I wrote this little melody just to modulate the last song's ending chord into something that matches the next song's intro chord. But it actually ended up being one of my favorite moments on the album. It sounds kind of like a creepy, soft lullaby with a vacuum going in the other room. This intro part is me playing the organ patch on an old Casio keyboard that I found at a thrift store and singing along. I added like one extra vocal track, but the first vocal and the organ are performed together in one recording, which isn't that interesting, but it's just something I don't usually do. I don't usually sing and play an instrument at the same time. I think recording just by myself at home with no need to book studio time is totally a double-edged sword, because on one hand I end up dragging out the process of making a song for way, way too long, and I haven't honed the skills of just getting in there and recording what you need to do and then getting out. But on the other hand, it's a lot more flexible, and creative ideas don't have to stop just because I'm in the middle of recording. I can always just stop singing and go back to work on the instruments, or add more tracks and develop a harmony or something that would be impossible or just a big headache if you were booking studio time or working with someone else and having to respect their schedule. This song is a good example of one that went through a lot of revisions and rethinkings, and originally it was a really relentless, constant drum beat kind of song. And I did stuff like, I added this no stars part, it's an extra 2 beats that weren't there originally, and I stripped it down mostly to just kick and snare and the drums, and I tried to add more stop and go and variation in the song. And you'll notice that's a recurring theme with the edits that I ended up making to these songs. And even still, one of the main criticisms I get for this album is that it just has too much energy that lasts for way too long. Which, okay, just, don't listen to it all at once, I guess. And man, I can't believe I did these falsetto notes here. It sounds okay, though. So this song is from the point of view of a caveman who's meeting an alien, and he just knows that it's wrong and he can't deal with it. And I guess the alien is stranded or in need of help in some way, and the caveman just refuses to help because he gets a primal reaction from meeting someone not of the earth. Of course, in reality, cave people were probably freaked out all the time by totally natural things, too. I like the random square notes that are playing in this part. Almost all of the synths in my songs these days are from a plugin called Synth One, which is very popular and free. And it's just a good all-around synth. It can do a little bit of everything. And I'm happy to say that finally I pretty much know what all the knobs do. And I can make my own custom patches or emulate synths I've heard in other songs. And when I was younger, that stuff was just black magic to me, and I had no idea how any of it did, and it looked suspiciously like math, so I didn't really try. One thing I really miss is my parents had this really old early 80s monophonic synthesizer, and I used to plug it in and mess with it and have no idea what I was doing, but there's something really satisfying about physically turning a knob and seeing a light blink faster or slower and hearing the sound transform. But it would drive me nuts to actually have to record like that because I always want to tweak everything at every stage of production. And having to decide how something's going to sound and then record it and then be stuck with that is not my idea of a good time. Case in point, I got another one of these swirly synthy outros going here, and the synthesizer here required a lot of finagling and going back and forth and making it softer, or adding more of a gliding portamento between the notes. And there's 3 different synthesizers playing right now.